Welcome to the debate. Today, we're confronting really a fundamental strategic choice that contractors and roofers face when they're trying to maximize their profitability through the supplement process. And we're drawing our insights here directly from Latif's principles, specifically what's laid out in Chapter 13 around labor, safety, and debris management.
Right, and it's important to frame this correctly. This whole conversation is about professionalism. It's about ensuring contractors get fair compensation for the full scope of work, everything required by code and contract. This isn't about, aggressive boss-up tactics, but about a rigorous application of standards.
Absolutely. But the strategy is where we diverge. When you're aiming for those truly transformational revenue increases, the kind that can move a large company towards, or even past, $1 million in additional annual revenue, the central question really becomes this: should contractors be systematically prioritizing the aggressive, consistent inclusion of complex, high-value, and, let's face it, subjective line items? Things like overhead and profit or specialized safety labor?
Or is the safer, more reliable path really one of volume and efficiency? I'm going to argue that focusing so heavily on those complex subjective charges introduces just a massive amount of administrative friction and, frankly, it invites heightened scrutiny from adjusters. So for me, the most profitable strategy relies on reliably documented, easily verifiable code-based items and simple omissions. They provide predictable, sustainable profit without all the fighting.
Okay, I see why you prioritize that certainty, I do. But I would argue that, well, certainty at a lower dollar value leaves legitimate, non-negotiable business costs completely uncovered. To achieve sustainable scale, contractors have to integrate the high dollar items. The Xactimate unit pricing it's just a baseline. It explicitly fails to account for general overhead, G&A, and the necessary profit margin that keeps a business solvent, insured, and, growing.
The goal is certainly to cover G&A, but the execution of how you get there matters immensely.
And that execution requires actively pursuing items like project manager supervision, that's the lab super line item, and securing 18 to 20% O&P on any multi-trade claims. The simple omissions, while they're crucial for your credibility, they just mathematically cannot cover the true cost of running a professional operation, not one with administrative staff, calculated overhead, and high liability insurance. You simply can't scale without capturing the G&A costs that are embedded in O&P.
That is a compelling financial necessity, I'll grant you that, but what is the price of that leverage? You're introducing some of the major red flags that Latif actually discusses in the material, triggers that lead to denial, to negotiation loops, and just wasted time.
Time is money, no doubt about it.
And when you look at the ROI for a skilled supplement professional, we're talking about productivity valued at over $3,000 an hour. So wasting 45 minutes fighting an O&P denial that forces you to write 2 rounds of rebuttal letters, that costs thousands in lost opportunity. I favor repeatable, low-friction approvals. You get those by focusing on items that are just difficult to dispute when you've documented them correctly.
So let's unpack that strategy a little. What kind of items define this low-friction success for you?
They're the objective requirements. This means citing code-mandated necessities. For instance, IRC 905.2.8.5 for drip edge, or 905.2.71 for ice and water shield in certain climate zones. These aren't opinions, they're jurisdictional mandates. We also focus on indisputable hidden damage, but using very precise language. We say unviable surface for deteriorated decking, not the ambiguous term rot, which can trigger policy exclusions about maintenance.
Okay, so let's start the deeper debate right there, with those contentious, high-value labor items. I believe we must be absolutely uncompromising on OSHA-mandated costs, specifically competent person supervision, which we track with that lab supercode, especially for high-risk jobs like steep slope roofs. Anything 712 pitch or greater.
And why is that non-negotiable in your view?
Because it's a federal safety mandate. It's under OSHA 1926-502H. But more importantly, the person filling that role is distinct. They are the competent person, responsible only for site safety and hazard correction. It's a supervisory role that is completely separate from the working foreman who is actively performing production labor. If we just absorb that $50 to $65 per hour charge, we're either running an unsafe job site or we are intentionally compressing our margins to an unsustainable point.
I agree completely that the cost is legitimate, the role is mandated. However, documentation of legitimacy does not guarantee payment. Lab Super is consistently one of the most denied or reduced line items because adjusters will almost always argue that basic supervision is already embedded or bundled into the base R&R labor rates. They see the competent person as a necessary cost of doing business, not a separate billable line item.
But that bundling argument is fundamentally flawed when you're talking about safety compliance. The working foreman is focused on production. The competent person is focused on hazard mitigation. You're suggesting that to avoid a fight, contractors should just accept that the legal cost of safety should be paid out of their already slim R&R profit margin? I mean, that's just a race to the bottom.
I'm suggesting that administrative energy is a finite resource. The time that it takes to cite specific OSHA regulations, attach the written safety plan, and justify why this specific role is non-negotiable, like we see in the source material's $8,200 case study, is considerable. Why spend that effort fighting a regulatory interpretation when you could spend it documenting an undisputable physical necessity, like code-mandated valley metal replacement found during the tear-off? One yields a guaranteed approval. The other yields a protracted debate with a really unpredictable outcome.
You're trading a high-certainty, low-dollar win for a low-certainty, high-dollar necessity. The difference between just surviving and actually scaling is in securing those necessities.
Well, let's pivot to the biggest necessity then. Overhead and profit, O&P. This is where the structural integrity of your high-leverage strategy, I think, really faces its toughest scrutiny.
O&P is the ultimate game changer because it covers all those non-job-specific expenses, the G&A costs, that Xactimate unit pricing just omits. We're talking about office rents, administrative salaries, marketing, insurance, vehicle maintenance. It's what keeps the lights on.
And when is the pursuit of O&P most justified?
It is automatically justified according to all industry standards anytime you are coordinating multiple trades. If a claim requires roofing and, say, interior drywall or gutter replacement, the coordination, the scheduling, quality control, the liability, it all shifts from the subcontractor to the general contractor. That 18 to 20% O&P is the fee for managing that complexity. Failing to include O&P when you're acting as a GC is a fundamental failure to cover your own G&A.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the justification is automatic. That 18 to 20% O&P request, if it's not supported by absolutely impeccable evidence of multi-trade involvement, acts as a huge administrative red flag. Adjusters often deny the entire line item, and crucially, they use that complex request as a reason to scrutinize every single other line item on your supplement packet.
Well, they scrutinize it because it's the largest financial multiplier on the claim. Of course they do. But if you have the proof, the estimate detailing the drywall repair right alongside the roofing, the burden of proof is met. You have to factor in that multiplier. Omissions are foundational, but if you secure a $1,000 code item and then get 20% O&P on top of it, that's where the high leverage returns really begin.
But the risk of a cascading denial just outweighs that benefit for high-volume standard claims. A cleaner, higher efficiency strategy is to first secure 100% of the simpler, frequently missed objective increases that are just difficult to refute.
Like what specifically? What are you suggesting we prioritize over something as fundamental as O&P?
Well, think about proper disposal costs. Xactimate labor assumes the contractor owns their own hauling equipment. If you rent a 30-yard dumpster for debris, which is common practice, that cost is separate. We use the line item DMO dump, which is the specific code for renting that equipment. An invoice for the rental is objective and it's easily approved. Or consider capturing updated price lists. If a job is delayed by 60 or 90 days, the increased material cost is an objective financial fact. These are simple, low-friction financial increases that build your supplement base reliably.
Those are crucial inputs, yes, but they are incremental additions. They're measured in hundreds, maybe $1,000. They don't provide the structural coverage that 18 to 20% OMP delivers across the entire claim value. If a contractor is scaling and handling, say, 5 to 10 multi-trade claims per month, they cannot afford to forego 20% of their G&A recovery. That reliance on just incremental emissions prevents high-end growth.
And I would argue that reliable cash flow, generated by 100% approval on those low-friction items, allows for more consistent growth than sporadic, high-dollar wins that require intensive administrative overhead and, frankly, legal risk.
We're debating efficiency versus leverage then, and the ultimate metric of success in supplementing is making approval the path of least resistance.
Exactly. And that means providing irrefutable documentation that just bypasses any debate. This brings us right back to the code-based approach. We have to use strategic language. Take the decking example again. We use unavailable surface instead of rot. Why? Because rot implies long-term deterioration, which can trigger policy exclusions related to maintenance. Unavailable surface is a statement of current structural integrity necessary for a safe, warrantable installation, a non-negotiable scope item.
The strategic use of language is certainly critical, but the financial yield is the limiting factor in that strategy.
But these highly documented code-based items get approved quickly, often within 72 hours and without negotiation. That efficiency is repeatable. It avoids the high cost of conflict that's so often triggered by, asking for too much too soon with those high-percentage subjective items.
That speed is excellent for high-volume, straightforward claims. I'll give you that. However, I would frame this differently when complexity is unavoidable. While sure, drip edge or valley metal codes might add a few $100s per line item, the high leverage triggers are the real path to doubling a claim's value.
Okay, name a scenario where that high leverage trigger is both unavoidable and completely justified.
Discontinued materials. That invokes IRC 1506.2 compatibility requirements, potentially forcing a full slope or even a full roof replacement because of a lack of matching materials. That single trigger escalates the claim exponentially, and it almost always necessitates a multi-trade response, which then justifies the OMP. The multi-trade case study showed exactly this. A modest $1,500 in interior work triggered a nearly $4,600 recovery in ONP alone. That is complexity that must be embraced.
You're making a powerful argument for the multiplier effect. But I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning for the majority of claims. That multiplier is fragile. If your foundational documentation for the code items, for the omissions, is weak or sloppy, the adjuster has all the reason in the world to tear apart your ONP and lab sub-requests too, arguing poor overall claim quality. The high-leverage items only work when the foundation is flawless.
But if a contractor is consistently hitting their foundation, the codes, the emissions, and is still failing to secure ONP when multi-trade work is clearly involved, they are essentially running their business at a theoretical deficit. They're subsidizing their general overhead through other means. It's an untenable position for any business with calculated G&A.
Which forces the strategic choice. Is the fight worth the return? I believe that high-volume, high-efficiency profitability is best achieved by mastering verifiable documentation for all the code-based and hidden damage items first. This maintains strong credibility with the desk adjuster, it ensures rapid approval, and it saves that high-value negotiation time for those rare, truly complex necessities like matching or severe structural complexity.
I maintain that for any contractor who's looking to scale and transition from operational survival to sustained high profitability, they must understand and master the complex charges O&P and labor supervision. These are essential for covering G&A and mandated safety costs. Relying solely on low-friction omissions, while safe, leaves necessary, legitimate revenue perpetually on the table.
Ultimately, both approaches demand maximum professionalism and thorough documentation. True success lies not just in recognizing what you can ask for, but in the efficiency and the execution behind that request.
Absolutely. We have been sharing insights derived from Latif's comprehensive content on how contractors can dramatically increase their profits by applying these principles to supplements. For a deeper dive into these frameworks, particularly the financial and administrative strategies, tune in to the next chapter.